Trek favorites. What are yours? Welcome to Trek Favorites. I'm Chuck Joyner, and this is the show where you get to hear from my tech friends and my Trek friends about some of their favorite episodes of Star Trek. Any series, any episode is fair game, as long as it hasn't been covered by another previous guest. And there really doesn't have to be any particular reason. If there is, that's great, but just the point is that it's one of their Trek favorites, and they're here to tell us why. This time, I'm really pleased to get Mr. Bryan Chaffin on to talk about one of his Trek favorites. Bryan, welcome, and thank you for the little musical background there.
Yeah, I like how you didn't even blink an eye.
It didn't faze me.
Didn't faze you even a little bit as I start singing the Trek theme song. Hope that doesn't end up costing you royalties.
I think I was talking loud enough that it would cover any computerized recognition of it.
If so, though, you're welcome.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm really intrigued. You picked episode 15 of the Star Trek The Original series, Let This Be Your Last Battlefield. And of course, folks, we don't do a lot of summaries here, but this is the one where the two aliens, each one of them half black, half white, get to the Enterprise and, kind of duke it out because of their long-standing feud. So, Bryan, this is such an iconic episode, but why is it one of your Trek favorites?
First of all, Chuck, I think it's very interesting how many season 3 shows that I think are fantastic, considering Gene Roddenberry had stepped down from a lot of day-to-day management of the show at that point. And yet, there are a lot of season 3 episodes that I personally like, and this is one of them. Everything from the fact that at times it's very cinematic. For instance, when they're Frank Gorshin. So Frank Gorshin, who many folks know as the Riddler, played I guess it's Beale. Is that right? Make sure I get that
right.
name correct.
Ambassador Beale.
Yeah. Please,
Commissioner Beale.
Chuck, that I didn't actually prep by rewatching the episode like I had intended. So, hopefully I won't make too much of a fool of myself. But this episode is just stuck in my mind for decades. And when Chuck first mentioned this to me some time ago, this is the episode that just leapt out in my brain. So, it's very cinematic at times. The Lokai is played by a fellow named Lou Antonio, who it turns out has done like 20 different TV movies and appeared in 20 or 30 different TV series all the way up through 2007. And I had never noticed. But anyway, they go running down the hall and they're doing this sort of loping run, which is always kind of stuck in my head. And then there will be like all of these scenes of city destruction playing sort of like in the background. And it it's the 60s. That was a pretty nifty effect. And to me, it comes off as very cinematic. So that's one of the first things that stood out. And then there is, of course, Frank Gorshin being in it. I was a big fan of the Batman TV series, especially when I was young. And recognizing the Riddler in this other episode was certainly fun to me as a young person watching Star Trek in syndication. And he is also an amazing actor. He's just he's an amazing actor. He steals most of the scenes that he's in. His diction, his projection, his cadences, his the way he stands, the way he moves his body only when necessary, and he commands the screen. Frank Gorshin was a terrific actor, and I think that a lot of people have never given him proper credit for that because of his Riddler role, and that is a mistake. So there's that. There is both the reveal at the end And spoiler, folks, is it okay to give spoilers 50 years later?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's
there's
by now.
The big reveal in the end itself is like, oh, I didn't see that coming. But then there's also all the meaning behind it. So I feel like we should actually talk about what the episode is about. Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah, sure.
All right. So Lou Antonio is playing a character named Lokai. And Lokai is some kind of fugitive. I think that the Enterprise ends up coming up on his ship, and then maybe he's doing a suicide attack or something on the Enterprise. Do you remember that detail?
Yeah. Well, actually, he stole a Federation shuttlecraft, and they came across it and then brought him on board. I have to say this, and I don't want to take you off track, but I've been watching the remastered versions, and boy, the picture of the image of them bringing that shuttlecraft on board, the redone version is phenomenal.
It is phenomenal. I love the redone ones. I hate going. Sorry about my volume. I hate going. There's a part of me that wants old stuff to remain as it was and to be viewed within the context of its times. And there's another part of me that just loved everything that was redone on the remastered versions. I own them and I love them. So, all right. So they bring him aboard and he's running and he's like, you've got to let me go. I'm running and my people and persecution and it's awful. And then along comes, and he's kind of he's got powers of sorts, and he ends up messing with the Enterprise, of course. And then along comes Beale, which is Frank Gorshin's character, and they both the striking thing about both characters is that they're black on one side and they're white on the other side. It's like this line drawn right down the middle. And Beale, who is Ambassador Beale, as you pointed out, is on the hunt for Lokai because he says that he is one of their people's greatest war criminals of all time. I think he probably would have called him a terrorist if the term terrorist had really already taken root in popular culture, but it had not. And he was a war criminal, and he's this terrible person, and he's killed millions of people, and he's awful. So Kirk doesn't want Beale to take Lokai because Lokai's got to answer for Federation things. Plus, he doesn't really know. He can't do anything to verify either one of their stories. Lokai is saying that he's the victim. Lokai is saying that Beale is the persecutor and the person who is wrong and evil. And Beale is saying that Lokai is the person who is wrong and evil. And there's no way for the Enterprise crew to do it because they apparently have never heard of this planet that they're from far corners of the earth. And Beale has been chasing him. Is it centuries or decades? Do we remember?
50,000 years or more.
Okay, 50,000 years. Right.
What it said. Yeah,
I forgot about that too. Thank you, Chuck. Did you watch the show before?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I'm glad one of us did our homework. That's good. All right, so cut to various power plays, blah, blah, blah. Beale ends up taking over the ship, and then Kirk is going to destroy the ship. And if Beale doesn't give it back, and Beale relents, but then they do it, they go through it all again. And there's lots of this loping runs through the Enterprise's corridors. And cut to the final minutes of the show. They get back to the planet and it's destroyed. It's just completely destroyed. These people have clearly annihilated themselves. And Kirk's like, why do you hate it? You're the last two people. You're the last two members of your people. Why do you hate each other so much? And Frank Gorshin goes, can't you see? And I feel like to do this properly. I should get the actual quote. Do you have it in front of you?
No, I don't.
Let's see if I. So quoting from Wikipedia to give credit where it's due, as Beale continues angrily to press his matter with Starfleet, he reveals the source of his conflict with Lokai. He and all his people on Chiron are black on their right sides, while Lokai's people are all white on their right sides. And this is something that you as the viewer have never noticed, in part because even if they were on the same on the screen at the same time, they weren't necessarily standing side by side. But at this point, they're standing side by side, and he goes, can't you see? He's which one is it? He's right on the black side, and he's white on the right side. And in this one moment, Star Trek lays bare the absurdities of racism. These people are identical, except for the skin pigmentation on each half of their body. And in their culture, those who had one form of this pigmentation dominated and treated the others like slaves. And then those people ended up rebelling, and that's how the world got destroyed. And it just lays bare the nonsense of racism. And it's just, it was, as a kid, I watched Star Trek starting in the fourth grade. So I would have been 75, I think, 1975, 1976. There was a TV station in Dallas on the UHF band that played the syndicated Star Trek for years, and every day I'd watch it, and I watched every episode multiple times over the years. And the first time I saw it, it was just like, whoa, that's amazing. And I grew up in the South. I grew up surrounded by lots of racists, and that's when I should probably bring my mother into the picture, because my mother watched this episode. Nancy Gravely, she has written for me in the past. She watched this episode when it first aired. So what would that be? 1968. See, late 67, early 68, something like that. Or 69. Anyway, into the 60s, right? And my mother was raised to be a racist. Her parents were born in Georgia. She grew up, she was born in Georgia too, actually, but they all lived in Waco, and my grandparents, bless their hearts, were racists, and they had raised my mother accordingly. And my mom tells the story about how she watched this episode of Star Trek, and it made her rethink everything that she'd been taught.
Wow.
And I mean, you're talking, she was in her mid-20s, I'm guessing. A lifetime of being an acceptable racist within an acceptable racist culture in the South, in Texas. And it made her rethink everything. And she raised me not to be a racist. She raised me to treat people as individuals, and to disregard skin tone and skin pigmentation, et cetera, and to value equality and to value justice. And these are things that I love her dearly for. And I didn't know this story until, I don't know, probably just a couple of years before Mac, the last few years of Macworld. And my mom was at a dinner at Macworld, the podcast dinner. Did you put that together, didn't you, Chuck? The podcast dinner that Rod would come to?
No, I did not.
Who put that together?
I do not know. That Rod Roddenberry came to?
Yeah, you would always be there.
Well, maybe I was there, but I didn't organize it. It may have been one of just those ad hoc things that came together.
No, it happened. It was very much a podcasting group. They would get together. We'd get together for dinner one night during Macworld, and my mom was there once, and Rod Roddenberry was there, And this was shortly after Trek Nation had come out. And I was thinking to myself, man, boy, I bet he would have put my mom's story into Trek Nation if he had heard it. And after dinner, we're standing on the sidewalk, and I said, "Hey, Rod, Rod Roddenberry is Gene Roddenberry's son." I said, "Hey, Rod, I think you probably won't want to hear the story from my mom." And my mom basically told the same story that I just stole from her, and it was clearly moving to him. It was clearly moving to him that his father's work, even if his father wasn't involved in the day-to-day running of the show as much in season 3, that it had a major effect on him, and that was really touching for me to see too. And if anything, it just deepened my love of that episode. And it's that episode is just such great storytelling. The pacing is fantastic. The drama is fantastic. The character setups for an hour-long show are great. And then you get one little reveal after another to slowly sort of, at first you think that Lokai's the good guy, and then Beale comes along and you start thinking that Lokai's the bad guy. But then you hear more from Lokai and you get more little bits, and maybe Bill's the bad guy. And it kind of goes back and forth. And until you get to this very end, it's like, well, can't you see? He's black on the right side and I'm white on the right side, or vice versa. And it's just compelling. It is great television. It is television at its finest, I think, from a storytelling standpoint.
What can I say? I mean, it has stood the test of time. It makes its point. In some ways, I'm kind of glad that you didn't do a rewatch, because what you're speaking from is you may not have all the little details at your command, but the gist of the story stayed with you. The importance of the story, the impact of the story stayed with you. And that impresses me. If you didn't watch it in the last 6 months, that you would remember as much of it as you do.
I haven't seen it in years.
Yeah.
Years. And that's the thing about the original Star Trek. I very much enjoy watching old TVs and old movies, but old TV in particular, to sort of get that snapshot in time. Now, it's not always accurate. Leave It to Beaver was far from an accurate show, right? The Partridge Family was far from an accurate show, but there are aspects of the 50s, late 50s, and the 70s in both of those cases that is evident from the show. Wild West. Well,
Robert Conrad.
Robert Conrad, right? I love that show. I still love that show. I own the whole series on DVD. Unfortunately, I don't really have a DVD player anymore. And I didn't even get finished while watching it all once I bought it. But it is such a great show, and is such a snapshot in time, both from like a technology standpoint, from an attitude standpoint, from a cultural standpoint. And Star Trek is certainly those things too. And so I like watching Star Trek for those reasons. But there are some episodes that, to me, stand up to a modern eye. There's a lot of episodes of Star Trek that stand up to a modern eye, even though the special effects might not be there, even though there are things that we have learned even from science that were not known or are not believed to be true at that time. And this episode is one of them. I also think the episode with where they go down to the fantasy planet with the rabbit and Jimmy Boy and the guy from Kirk's Past. That's Finnegan. Finnegan, thank you. Very nice. Finnegan is another episode that I think stands up to a modern eye. But Let That Be Your Last Battlefield stands up to a modern eye, and is also this incredible view into the past. It is this credible view into this moment of time when American culture is being is being sort of challenged by Star Trek in ways that it had not been challenged before on TV, and things beyond the world of Star Trek are happening that is challenging the status quo and challenging all the things that people have held sacred for so long. And this episode, like I said, it offers this sort of like, telescopic pinpoint view back into this moment of time. And for all these reasons, I love it. It's just a great episode.
If you go back and watch it, one of the things a couple things struck me. To follow up a little bit with some of your points, the eloquence with which both Beale and Lokai stated their positions, and you're right. You go from trying to figure out who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. They kind of end up both being bad guys, or at least really ugly kind of characters.
It's gray, almost like they're a little black and a little white.
Well, yeah, but but the eloquence and the attempts at manipulation by both positions to try to convince the Enterprise crew, and I mean from both positions, because they both do it. They both are very self-righteous in their attitudes, and that really struck me.
And Lou Antonio plays a freedom fighter.
Well, that's the way that is the way it is definitely characterized. He's a freedom fighter.
The 60s, man. You don't have freedom fighters on TV. You right? I mean,
yeah,
that didn't happen. He is that character, and Frank Gorshin is Beale. Like, they're both great actors. And Beale's cockiness and arrogance and absolute authority and absolute self-righteousness and righteousness both are just leap out from the screen. And then Lokai's victimhood and sense of injustice oozes from the screen. Agreed.
And the way that it's portrayed, you just don't know how much to buy it. I mean, they both definitely play their parts, and of course, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. So,
usually,
let's be fair about that. Frank Gorshin's character, it's fascinating to me to watch it all this time later, and still see pieces of the Riddler in his body language and in his intensity. I mean, in both of those roles, he has this ability to sort of work himself into a frenzy just by delivering his lines or delivering the character's thoughts, and I find that really intriguing.
But I don't think they're carbon copies of each other. I don't think he's just playing.
Oh no. Oh yeah, no, absolutely not. But there are pieces of it that you can see.
Yeah.
The showdown between Kirk and Beale over the potential destruction of the Enterprise. You were talking about the cinematography of it. I don't know how much of this you remember, but while they're doing the countdown and while Kirk's ordering the codes, they cut to just the eyes of the people on the bridge, and then just the mouths of the people speaking the codes. And I'm not enough of a student of TV of that time, but I don't know that anything was being done on TV like that, and it just added to it just added to the tension of the moment.
It really, really did. Yeah, you feel it. I mean, Kirk was always threatening to blow up the Enterprise, right? He was. This was a trick they used multiple times.
Yeah, but I think this may have been the first one where it got to that point. I think in the one with the invaders from the Andromeda Galaxy, there were attempts in different ways, but I'm pretty sure this was the first time we saw the destruct sequence spoken out by Kirk, Spock, and Scotty.
Is that true? I'm not going to argue with you. I thought that they did it multiple times, but memory compression and time compression are strange things.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were times that they might have tried to do it or threatened to do it in some other way, but this was the first time that Kirk was in complete control.
Yeah.
and doing that, and they took it right down to the edge.
Yeah.
And the question is, who's going to blink? And Beale blinked.
And Kirk's officers were just right there.
Yeah.
They were just right there. And they also, I mean, like they convey, like I can now that you mentioned the way they were cutting back and forth, I very specifically remember James Doohan as Scotty, and delivering his lines in a very somber fashion that he didn't normally get to use in the role of Scotty, and very matter of fact and very very somber and serious. And of course, Leonard Nimoy was just fantastic almost always, and so his delivery wasn't all that much of a surprise. But I definitely thought that James Doohan was. Yeah, it's a great episode. It's great storytelling. As I've learned more about, and I don't know anything about storytelling, but I know a lot more about storytelling than I did before I started trying to write fiction. And as the more I learn and I start seeing things that I've learned in TV shows or movies, or reading them in books, I think that this episode is great storytelling. Is great storytelling with a great moral and a great point. And it's not ham-fisted. They don't like batter you over the face about it. Like you said, Beale and Lokai, they're both bad guys at worst, and a mix of good and bad guys at best. There's no hero there. There's no hero between the two of them. Lokai did, in fact, kill millions of people in his quest to get freedom for his people. And Beale's people did, in fact, oppress significantly the other half of his people. And his government was clearly a crappy government, and Lokai was clearly someone who had done really horrible things. And they don't hammer this anti-racist message. They don't like batter you with it. It's just that one line. Can't you see? He's white on the right side and I'm black on the right side. I really wish I could get it straight. But that's, what the funny thing is, that's actually part of the point. You don't even, I mean, it's hard for me to remember who was which.
Right.
Because that's part of the whole point. That's great storytelling.
And at the very end, after they've both beamed down to the planet and they're basically, chasing each other beyond the Enterprise, down on the planet of this
they're doing that
destroyed civilization.
That lope they do, it just kills me.
Oh yeah, and the discussion by the bridge crew, and as I recall, Kirk, Uhura, and Spock all participated in that, and it's hard to express. You have to go and watch it. But the degree to which they don't understand the level of hatred that drove these two after all this time, and it's just like, and I think Kirk or Spock said that's all they have left is their hatred. And it is. I mean, there are a lot of deep messages there. But just the idea that, and I give so much credit to the actors and actresses, in that scene, who, like you say, they don't beat you over the head with it, but they just portray it as this is such an alien way of thinking to them as enlightened, 25th, whatever century, Starfleet officers.
Yeah, but they probably should have had a better understanding in it. There are several students of history in that group. Right.
Yeah, but I think it's one thing to read about it or study it. It's another one to have it displayed in living, people or characters or creatures or beings or whatever right in front of you.
And that is just from, Gene Roddenberry wanted to, present this world where greed wasn't really a thing and racism isn't a thing anymore. And, quite frankly, misogyny was still a thing, but, it is still a product of its time. But the fact that going back to Uhura, it never being a big deal that here was this black woman that was on the crew of the Enterprise. There were a couple of episodes where that was sort of mentioned, but it was presented from the beginning as not being a big deal, because that's the future that Gene wanted to present. And what you're describing does fit within that concept. So that's it's man, it was a great show. That was a great episode. I think there is still a lot to learn from Star Trek. I think that Star Trek is worthy of the modern eye, and not just for people like me who like to get these snapshots in time from the past.
Bryan, that's an interesting point, because we have not had that many selections of the original series on the show. And I've even had some guests off camera, and especially younger guests, say, they can't watch the original series because they just can't, they can't kind of buy into it. It's just because of the look and everything. And I do too, but I agree with you completely that, okay, if you can look beyond this, there's still there's some great entertainment, but there's some great messages and some important lessons there, and told through the lens of a different time. That I wish we could get people to appreciate that, if they can't get past the the brightly colored uniforms and those kind of things.
Yeah, that's a good point. And building on that point, Chuck, I wonder how much of my own enjoyment really does. I mean, of course, when I first started watching it wasn't that removed from the past, from the future. I'm sorry, from my present. I started watching it 6 years after it went off the air, and culture and science and TV really hadn't changed all that much. So I do have a bit of a grounding there, and at the same time, I do, like I said, and to emphasize this yet again, I do love getting these snapshots in time, these views into the past, and maybe that does make it more watchable for me. But the truth for me is that I love The Next Generation, and when The Next Generation was airing, I always thought to myself that they fixed all the sins of the past. You've got Picard the intellectual versus Kirk the brawler. You've got I don't know, the lots of things were improved and changed and everything, but I find it difficult to rewatch The Next Generation. I can watch any given episode of the original series on its own anytime. I find it very hard to get into rewatching random episodes of The Next Generation, unless they're episodes that really stood out for me.
That's interesting. Any particular reason? You think it's the characters or the method of?
No, I love the actors. I love the characters. Part of it. Here's a fun fact, by the way. When Star Trek first came on, I don't think I owned a TV. I was pretty broke, and I certainly didn't have cable or anything like that. And the first 3 episodes I saw were all the Ugly Bags of Mostly Water episode. It didn't and that's not a great episode. It's a great sort of, again, twist on what is life and what does it mean really to be human. But the episode is clunky, and the special effects are terrible, and the acting is wooden, and people haven't gotten into their characters. It's a first season episode, and there are several episodes of the first season of The Next Generation that were pretty weak. And watching, so I would say I'll give it a chance again, and I'll watch it, and it would be that same episode. I don't know how it is I managed to watch that same episode 3 times, but before the show was even syndicated. So because it would be reruns when I would just, and it would be airing and I just end up happening to see it. But there is, maybe it's because the Next Generation was less episodic. I mean, yeah, you did have Monsters of the Week, you had Visitors of the Week, that sort of thing. You had Location of the Week, but there was a lot of continuity from episode to episode, and things would build. Right, things that happened in one episode might end up being mentioned or have some relevance to a future episode, and because of that, it makes it less of a standalone. Like I'd probably enjoy it more if I actually just watched it sequentially. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, Bryan, knowing you the way I do, I think you're watching some of these things with a little bit different eye. You're watching it from the standpoint of an author, of someone who creates these kind of works, and a lot of us aren't. And that doesn't mean that there's a right way or wrong way. It's just we all watch some of these things based on whatever background we have.
Of course.
But I think you may have a little bit different eye toward it. I mean, because you're talking about the great storytelling, and absolutely, it's a great story, but that was not my first approach to it. When I went back and rewatched it, it's like, okay, there are these favorite moments about the characters. There's the obvious moral, which in some ways is very subtle, and also in some ways beats you over the head, which I think also is an interesting fact that they accomplish both of those at the same time.
Actually, I got to correct you. Let me rephrase that. I've got to offer you a tweak on what you just said.
Okay.
The lesson hits you over the head, but the delivery of that lesson is subtle.
Okay, I'll go with that.
We're talking once again about let this be your last battlefield.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not the ugly bags of mostly water.
Yeah. No. And listen, I mean, I think I've said that here on the show that there are no bad episodes of Star Trek, and I really do believe that.
Oh, come on, the Jungle Gym one, man. It's a bad episode. It's terrible.
The Jungle Gym?
The Tasha Yar's got to fight the chief's wife.
Oh, well, there's some that are regrettable. But well, I look again. You figure. Again, we've talked about this on the show too. You look at what each one of these shows is trying to accomplish. They've got to satisfy the network. The writers write it, the actors act it, but they have to have network considerations. They have budget considerations. They have all these considerations.
I felt that episode was like a leftover original series script that Gene repurposed.
It may have been. I don't know background to that story.
I don't either. I've never actually looked that one up, but that's a terrible episode of TV, man. It's terrible. It's terrible. There's nothing good about it. The acting is terrible. The premise is terrible. The effects are terrible. The fighting is terrible. The premise is terrible. The sort of the stereotypes are terrible. It's not a good. I don't know, man.
We'll come back to that some other time, because that'd be a fun discussion to argue. Not that I'm going to argue it's a great episode, but
I'd have to watch it again, and I'd probably end up loving it now.
Yeah, exactly.
I went through years of like Picard made me hate Shatner. Picard made me hate Kirk. Both from Patrick Stewart is such an amazing actor, but the way Picard would solve problems with his mind instead of fighting 99.9% of the time was always just appealed to me. That appeals to what makes me. And whereas, Shatner is there to throw an awkward punch at the drop of a hat. And so for years, I couldn't stand Kirk because I idolized Picard so much. And it took a long time to be able to sort of accept them each in their own way, in their own time.
Okay, so I'm going to defend Kirk just a little bit. All right. First of all, Gene pitched Star Trek as Wagon Train to the Stars. And at that point, there were an awful lot of Westerns on TV, and this was supposed to be a Western in space. And, what did you have in Westerns? Well, you had good guys and bad guys, cowboys and Indians, whatever. And there were a lot of fights and, a lot of that kind of thing. And so there was a certain amount of appeasement, I think, going on. But I don't think that you give Kirk enough credit. I mean, look.
I didn't then. I do now.
Yeah. I mean, Picard never talked a computer to its knees. So, give Kirk that.
Okay. Fine.
That's it? You're going to capitulate that easy?
Well, no, it's okay. No, fine. I won't, because the ways in which Kirk would talk a computer to its knees are ridiculous.
Now,
what we know now, of course, and so it's you have a tremendous point, but there seems to also be a tremendous caveat to go with that point.
I agree. But they're both. We have to remember these are television shows, So the captains both have to survive to come back next week and do it again.
That's true, and there was a whole lot about computers that Star Trek was really the first to bring into TV, and computers with sentience sometimes, and computers with certainly with some element of free will to what they are, and I think there were a lot of worries about the future that were being expressed in some of those concepts. So anyway, yeah, you do have a good point. Picard never talked a computer down to its knees.
Yeah. So, gee, I think, I'm not sure. I think I just got one over on Bryan.
You did, for sure.
I'm going to bed happy now.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Oh, please do. Please do. Bryan, I'm so glad you picked this episode, because I think it takes us back to the original series, and it's a highlight episode. There's no doubt about it. And folks, if you are one of those that have not been able to dig into the original series, go back and look at this and watch it. Watch it a couple times, or watch it not just on the surface, but watch some of the deeper things going on with Kirk and Spock and Scotty and Uhura. And definitely with the two aliens too. Pass that through the filters of what we see today on TV, and I don't care which news channel you go for. I see reflections of both of those, and it's highly regrettable at this point. And maybe it'll make you take a look at your own political positions.
Let me ask you a quick question. Do you remember the first time you saw it?
No. I'd be lying if I said I did. I've seen it, a lot of times, but I can't say I remember the first.
Well, I think I do, but I'm also quite aware that I may be conflating all kinds of, and compressing all kinds of different memories into one, and jumbling stuff up in my mind. But I am positive that I had not realized that they were reverse images of each other. Do you remember did you notice that before that one line?
I do not. No, I do. I will agree with you. I don't remember. I mean, now it's one of those things. Once you see it, you can't unsee it, because there are a number of times.
It's still hard to see it, though.
Well,
look for it.
The reason I think that it's easy, but see, I can't divorce myself from the fact that I already know.
Sure.
Because there are times that one would be here, one would be, they're facing off to each other, and they're both black, or they're both white. Mm. And of course, that obviously means that, they're mirror images of each other. But at the time, no, until Gorshin or Beale pointed it out. No, I don't think, it struck me either. And there's a big thing that goes on, if you remember, in the beginning of the episode, where when they pick up loci and are trying to determine what caused this strange pigmentation thing, both McCoy and Spock, for once, agree that this has to be a one-of-a-kind thing.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah,
and that made it really surprising when Beale shows up.
Right, and I think that then all of a sudden then you didn't think about that they were mirrors, but that they were two of a kind, and that's sort of I think the point the Enterprise crew made. They didn't even notice it themselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for going down this path with me and talking about it. It's an episode that I enjoy talking about.
Well, I absolutely am glad you did it, because it went back. It gave me a chance to rewatch one of my favorite episodes and gave me an excuse to, and really appreciate it again for a lot of different reasons. So.
Can I change my favorite episode? Can we go to the first episode of Enterprise because of the shower scene?
Nobody's done that one yet, so we can have you come back and talk about the shower scene. No?
That's not
okay.
I hated the show. I did not watch that series because I was so offended by the brute force attempt to sexualize the show in a artificially ham-fisted way.
Yeah, appeasing the creative. Let's see, Enterprise though was not a network show. So
yeah, it was Enterprise.
Was that
got the Bacula series?
Yeah, but was that?
Yeah, it was a series.
Was that UPN? It wasn't an NBC, ABC, CBS.
It might have been UPN.
I think it may have been UPN. And here we go. You're appeasing the network executives.
Yeah, so, they wanted some hot sex.
Yeah.
Sort of.
So, Bryan, tell folks where they can find you when you're not here arguing black and white or white and black.
I do my weekly podcast, The Apple Context Machine, at least once a month. I am the editor-in-chief of the Mac Observer. You're going to let that go? Yeah. I do my weekly show at least once a month. And I'm the editor-in-chief of the Mac Observer, and my blog, geektells.com. That's TELLS. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
It's always a pleasure, Bryan. Thank you so much. Come back and do it again.
Will do.
All right. Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Trek Favorites. You can watch the video versions of this, and you really should, to watch Bryan's expressions, on both our website and our YouTube channel. You can reach me at TrekFavorites or Chuck at TrekFavorites.com. And by all means, come on over and take a look on our Facebook page. We'd love to have you there as well. Until the next time, thanks for joining us. Visit TrekFavorites.com to access all our shows, watch the video versions on our YouTube channel, and connect with us on Twitter and Facebook as @TrekFavorites.